It truly is an honor to be with you all today, and I want you to know I mean that from the bottom of my heart, because when Jim invited me to speak, this was the weekend after the executive order had been issued. I had a lot going on and a lot that I was trying to figure out, and as I was trying to think of the most appropriate message to share with this group, I decided to go to your website, and I saw all of the guests that you've had come speak before. I saw the governor, attorney general, Rhodes scholars, and needless to say, I was a little bit intimidated. So anyways, it's a good group that you guys have here, and I think it's a really timely message. But fortunately for me, it's not the first time I've found something intimidating. I recall a time 12 years ago when I was first starting my work with Catholic Charities Refugee Program. And after I was a caseworker, one of my first roles with the program was to help refugees find employment here in Indianapolis. And one of the first cases I worked with was a gentleman from Afghanistan who had about a 20-page curriculum vitae. He had been the Vice Chancellor of Academic and Scientific Affairs at Kabul University in Afghanistan. And as I was looking through his extensive experience, I was really amazed and intimidated, and I thought, how did these cards get so stacked here on this earth that I'm the one helping this gentleman? And I remember when I first went to meet with his family. Now, it was just him and his daughter initially. His family had been separated during the war, and it wasn't until later that his wife was able to come. But when I first went to meet with his daughter, I was going to meet them at their apartment complex. And I had been praying about the experience, and I was thinking about all the things that I'd want to have ready in advance as I met with this gentleman. And I'll never forget the moment when I pulled up in my car. He was waiting outside for me, dressed in a business suit with his briefcase, and he was beaming. And the moment I walked out of the car, he took a little bow and he said, "Thank you so much for coming to see me." And that started really the beginning of a great friendship with him and his family, and also the beginning of an amazing journey with Catholic Charities and all of the incredible people that I've been privileged to meet over the years. And I think I'm going to take this off if that's okay. It's a little bit easier if I just hold it. But anyways, as we've heard so much about refugee resettlement in the news lately, it can be kind of hard to figure out what exactly is going on, especially as things have only really been coming up in the media about refugees maybe in the past couple of years. And really, this is a program that has existed in the United States for decades. So I'd like to take a step back with you all for a moment, and I'd like to ask you to come with me and look at the situation through three different lenses. First of all, through the lens of a refugee. Secondly, through the lens of the historical context of our country and its policies and how we welcome refugees to the United States. And then thirdly, through the lens of the Catholic Church and what is the Catholic perspective on this issue. So, starting with the lens of a refugee. Nobody wakes up and suddenly decides they want to come to the United States because they think it would just be a better place to live. Refugees are pushed from their home because they have nowhere to go. And for all of the countries that Jim mentioned that we have welcomed refugees from, the stories are essentially the same. And when I ask them, how did you know when it was time to leave? There's war going on in your homeland, and you never know how close it's going to come to you. It's an unsafe situation. How did you know this was the moment you had to go? And for most of them, it was when the war was literally at their doorstep. And their village was bombed, their city was attacked, or they had family members that were brutally killed in front of their eyes. So very traumatic situations where they didn't really have time to plan. It was the moment of tragedy hit them, it was at their doorstep, and they basically had to run. And mind you that when I say run off, I really literally mean run. A lot of times they're not going to be getting in a vehicle and just drive away. There's really no time to plan for that. So basically, as they're running for their lives, I've asked them, how did you even know where to go when you're running? There was a gentleman from Somalia who told me when he escaped in the early 2000s, his village had been attacked. His family fled in the middle of the night, and for the next several months, as they found their way out of Somalia and into Kenya, they were literally running by night and hiding during the day. And when I asked him, how did you find your way? Because again, there's no map showing them how to get to Kenya, how to get to a refugee camp, how to get to a place where they can be safe. He would just shrug and say, God. There's no real system in place for what do you do now that you're running for your life and have nowhere to go. It's just you kind of figure it out as you go, and it's a really different kind of faith journey because they literally have absolutely nothing else to depend on, period. They've left their homes, they've left their jobs, their identity, everything that they've known. And the gentleman from Somalia, that story is not unique to him. So essentially, refugees, you can say, they have three lives. They have the life they knew in their homeland, and then they have a second life where they're in transition. It's the life where they're fleeing, and then eventually find themselves in a temporary living situation. Sometimes that could be a refugee camp that they've happened to find in a neighboring country. Sometimes that can be a city in a neighboring country where they're kind of under the radar. For example, a lot of the refugees that fled from Burma found themselves living in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, where they could live and get jobs, but they could not be legal residents. So they find themselves in so much limbo because they can't stay where they are, but finding a place that will take them in is one of the most challenging things that anybody has to face on this planet. And the constrictions of nationality and boundaries and how we define ourselves and what makes each country a country, it's a very, very tricky thing, and it's a hard conversation to have. But really in that second phase, when they're in a refugee camp or in a temporary living situation in a city, it's really a life of waiting. They don't know what's going to happen next. Really, their dream would be for peace to come to their homeland and to go home. But for so many of them, that doesn't come, the opportunity doesn't come, and they basically don't know how long they'll have to be under the radar. There's some people that have been in refugee camps for decades, and anyways, they start to lose hope during that time. So during that time, they also have some idea of what's going on across the world and what countries will receive them. And the United States is one of 28 countries that receive refugees. And how that process started was really during World War II. The UNHCR, which stands for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, was formed in 1951. And that was as a response to the displacement of people all across Europe after World War II. And it formed at that time really to help all of these displaced refugees return home. The goal was what's called repatriation and returning home. And that remains the top priority today. And that's why there's only less than 1% of the around 21 million refugees worldwide that are even resettled in a third country. So it is a very, very small number. Refugee resettlement didn't actually start in the United States until 1975, and that is actually the same year that our program at Catholic Charities opened. And this was in the midst of the Vietnam War, and you'll recall images of Vietnamese refugees that were just fleeing Vietnam in boats, showing up on foreign shores into countries that had no idea what to do with them, not unlike today. And basically, as the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees took notice of this situation, it was said we can't blame them for leaving. They have nowhere to go, but they're coming into countries that really don't have stable enough economies to accommodate them. Surely there's a better way, especially if it takes so much time to find peace in these situations where wars erupt. Maybe instead of living in a temporary situation or a refugee camp where people are just bringing aid to them for an indefinite amount of time, they could actually be taken to a country where they could actually participate in society and get jobs and contribute to that space. So in 1975, these programs opened up across the United States, and it was supposed to be a short-term project. But once it was seen to go so successfully, refugees, because they have had so little control over their lives for so long, the moment they're able to provide for themselves, to get a job, raise a family, they don't want to be dependent on anyone else. They want to write their own story. So they take that opportunity and run with it. So not only is it good for refugees, but it's also good for the American economy, because it's such a hardworking, resilient group of people. And that's been exciting to see people develop and contribute to our own city in these ways over the years. The Refugee Act of 1980 was really what put in place formal refugee resettlement services as we see them today. As I said, as programs opened up in 1975, they thought it was going to be temporary. It was seen to be successful. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a shortage of humanitarian crises that would allow us to close. I would love to not need to exist. But so long as there are wars on this earth, there will be people in need and people that have nowhere to go. And the United States, while we're one of 28 countries that does this, we have the most incredible resources for helping these individuals. And it's really, I feel like, who we are as a country is you look at our, kind of questionable history at times. We do have so much wealth and so much that we can do, and as refugees come here, they find themselves so excited and so easily able to adapt into the ways of being that we have here. So really, one thing that's important to recognize in this process is a refugee is a very, very specific political status. I know a lot of times as you hear stories across the news, refugee and immigrant can be used kind of interchangeably, but refugee is a very, very specific immigration status, and a person that's given refugee status has to prove that they were direct targets in their homeland based on their race, ethnicity, religion, political background, or membership in a particular social group. And it is not easy to get resettlement anywhere, and it's particularly not easy to get into the United States as a refugee. They say of all the doors to get into the United States, the door to get into the United States as a refugee is the most difficult to pass through. And that is because security is a priority to all of us, to them as well, and they want to make sure that, again, anybody that's coming in is exactly who they say they are. So the security screenings for the refugees, while they say that takes 18 to 24 months, typically last well past that, just because people are waiting for a really, really long time to get here. And I have some literature available to you on the screening process and a number of things that are going to be out on the table with as you're leaving. But just know that the Department of Defense, the Department of State, the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the National Center for Counterterrorism are all involved in checking out these people. And again, for all that they've been through already, that is also a very difficult process in and of itself. The multiple interviews, the biometric data, the biographic data, and all of these entities are involved in interviewing them as well. So we really feel that, again, while we're not the ones conducting the interviews, basically we're the ones just welcoming them after they've been selected by the Department of State, that it is a very, very effective process. And basically, these aren't people that decided to come here. These are people that we handpicked, really out of the 21 million refugees. So if there's any question about a particular individual, they will not get the opportunity to resettle in the United States. So I think right now what's going on, though, is just a lot of confusion based on what's going on in other countries. And as you look at what's going on in Europe, that is a unique situation, too, because all of those countries are landlocked. And as people flee Syria, naturally, they're just trying to find their way into somewhere else. But in the United States, because we're not landlocked, we have the luxury of handpicking which refugees into our country. And we feel that this is a really efficient process that benefits not only refugees escaping war, but also the American economy. So when we hear news with the executive order that casts a negative light on the work that we do, it's really difficult because, again, we know the families that this affects. And, last year we resettled 676 refugees, mostly coming from Burma, but also Democratic Republic of Congo, Sudan, Somalia, Syria, Iraq, and probably about 500 of those were joining family members. So as you hear executive orders that are even doing a temporary block, what's difficult is this puts these families in just to such a state of worry, not knowing if they're ever going to be reunited with their families again. And what's also difficult is at the start of the fiscal year, Congress had already approved 110,000 refugees to come into the United States for the fiscal year, which runs from October through September. But with the text of the executive order, that number would be cut by more than half. So from 110,000 down to 50,000. So what that means for a program like ours is that we have per capita federal funding, and if we're getting less refugees coming in, and we also have a 4-month period where we're not getting them coming in, that leaves the future of our program indefinite because we're wondering how we'll be able to sustain ourselves, particularly not knowing what will happen past those 4 months. So, and it's a lot of time, it's a time of a lot of uncertainty. And just again, to give you a picture of how that process works, once cases are approved by the Department of State, the Department of State contracts directly with 9 national resettlement agencies, most of which are religious affiliated. The largest of the 9 national agencies is the USCCB, or the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And each of the 9 national agencies have local affiliates where they delegate cases to. So there are hundreds of local affiliates across the United States that work with refugees. And basically we each have those same requirements from the federal government for the services that we provide. We pick up families from the airport. We take them to their home the moment they arrive. And again, we have the privilege of working with a number of fantastic apartment complexes in the community that will agree to let us set up the apartment and fully furnish it with donated items before the family even gets here. And we will have a hot, culturally appropriate meal waiting for them. And so we'll have a celebratory moment when we're introducing them to their new home, and then we'll show them how to use everything that's in their home. For some people, they've been living in refugee camps their whole lives, so the things in the apartment are very new to them. And others were living in cities and were very wealthy, so the apartment maybe isn't so impressive. But anyway, so basically once they come here, they basically kind of hit the ground running with really starting their new life as Americans. And we bring them into our office for orientation, where we explain the services that we provide. We take them to all of their initial appointments, which include health screenings, primary care physician, Social Security, and they immediately begin our classes, which we provide English classes, pre-employment training classes, and cultural orientation classes. And we do invite community members to be part of that because one, we just want to connect them with the community, but we have people coming from the bank to teach them how to open a bank account and how to balance a checkbook. We also have members of the police department that will come and build relationships with them and explain how the role of the police here in Indianapolis is much different than probably what they faced in the countries that they're coming from. And they want to make sure that refugees know these are people that you can trust. And basically, as they're going through all of that, we're helping them also to find employment. And most refugees are able to get a job within 1 to 3 months after arrival, so it's very quick. And that works well because the financial assistance that's provided to them to cover rent, utilities, and basic needs is very, very short term. It's just for a couple months. And so it's also something where they're wanting to get a job as quickly as possible. And fortunately, the employment climate in Indianapolis is so good that we're getting more calls from employers wanting to hire our refugee clients than we even have clients to fill. So I know the executive order came out, many of the businesses we work with were calling us concerned because we're providing them also with a steady labor force that's been able to grow their business. And, you know, it's something that's of concern to all of us, not only for the refugee families, but not knowing what this will eventually mean. And what's sad too is it's created a negative perception of something that is a really good and beautiful thing, something that's a really strong part of our country. Historically, refugee resettlement in the United States has been the most stable form of immigration. And we just want people to understand the goodness of who these people are and what they bring. They're so excited for the opportunity to be here, to learn English, become American, and to start their new lives. And, you know, as I was speaking earlier on about the gentleman from Afghanistan who had been a college professor, he was really amazing to me because here he is, he brings all this wealth of knowledge, and he knew that being in his 60s and just really starting to learn the English language, that he wasn't going to get the same employment opportunities that he had in Afghanistan. And we worked with him to find a job in a number of fields, but it was, nobody really wanted him because of his age or the difficulties with the language barrier. And I remember the first job he was offered was to be a cashier at Walgreens. And the only reason he was offered that job was because the manager of that Walgreens had come as a refugee herself when she was a kid. And it was particularly tricky for him because not only was he just starting to learn English and he was in his 60s, but he was intimidating to all these other employers who knew he had, that he was a college professor. So we really tried to find his way into the right place. But again, Walgreens was the first place that said yes. And after he was given that job offer and we were leaving, I was asking him what he thought. And he said, "I am so happy." He said, "Somebody's giving me a chance." He says, "If God wants this to be my job, I will do it for him." And he showed up every day with a smile on his face. I remember his first day of training, he actually hand drew a replica of the keyboard on the cashier so he could go home and memorize it. And since then, he's been able to move. He worked with Walgreens for a while, and again, he's been able to learn more English and get a job that more closely matches his work in the scientific field, and he now lives in St. Louis. But again, when people come here, they're starting from scratch. They've checked their identity at the door. Many of them, they had high position in the countries where they're from, and they're coming here and nobody knows them. And oftentimes, our system just isn't built, even for those that were academics and professionals in their homeland. The same systems here are different. So there are some people, if they're younger, they're able to be recertified. I know there's one gentleman I worked with that he got a law degree in Iraq and then he came here and he got a second law degree. So there are people that are, they've survived a lot. So when they come here, getting a second law degree may not be the most difficult thing that they have faced in their lives. And it's an honor to know these people and to work with them. And as I have the opportunity to talk with you today, again, I just want to share with you the goodness of what we're able to do. We've been resettling refugees in the Archdiocese for over 40 years now. We want to continue that work. So we would love for you to join with us in the areas of advocacy, financial support, or volunteering. I know a lot of times I'm mostly asking for in-kind donations when I come before groups like this because we're used to filling apartments really with anything you would have in your house. If you have furniture to get rid of, anything you'd like to donate, that's something that we take. But not knowing what will happen again with the text of new executive orders. And again, we had a federal judge that blocked the original one, so we've continued to get cases for now. I don't know what the new executive order will say. So for now, we're not so much asking for in-kind donations as financial contributions so that we can sustain ourselves through this time of uncertainty. And when refugees do start coming again, we want to be able to have the same dedicated, talented staff members to serve them that have been serving them for all these years. So we would ask for your support in that way. And also contacting your representatives to let them know the goodness that refugees do bring to our communities, and that these are people that we do want to see coming here. So I would ask for your support that way as well. And to get connected to us, you can also go to www.helpcreatehope.org, and you'll find links to the Refugee Resettlement Program with Catholic Charities and also information about how to donate online. But I'd like to conclude my talk with two final thoughts. One is the words of Mother Teresa, who said, "If we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other." And the second is a poem, and this is a poem that stands at the base of the Statue of Liberty. It was written in the mid-1800s by Emma Lazarus. And the poem is called The New Colossus. The title of it was a juxtaposition to what was known as the Old Colossus, which was one of the seven wonders of the ancient world. So if you can picture the Statue of Liberty as it looks today, it was modified from one of these seven wonders of the ancient world, which was a large male statue that stood across two Greek islands, and it was a symbol of conquering and dominion and victory and triumph over others. She thought the Statue of Liberty really embodied something different in terms of its own identity and who we are as a nation. So as she wrote the poem, she was thinking about that, and the poem says, "Not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name Mother of Exiles. From her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Her mild eyes command the air-bridged harbor that twin cities frame. Keep, ancient lands, your storied pomp, cries she with silent lips. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." Thank you.
Thank you.